What's up guys, it's me Jeremy, and today we're going to be doing a quick Season 4 Masteries guide for everyone. So what I'm going to do in this guide is not tell you what Masteries to take, but rather give you the tools to make the decisions for yourself. So we'll be going over every single Mastery, and some of them are kind of terrible, while others are really interesting and I like them a lot. So let's get started. So we're going to start with the offense tree. We have this first Mastery, Feast. Every time you kill a unit, restore 2 health and 1 mana. I think this mastery is pretty solid. If you can find an extra point to put in here, it can be pretty good, but sometimes I was lacking points to put in here. And we have Fury next. So Fury is actually an extremely terrible mastery, and you should pretty much never take Fury. And let me show you why. So the reason why is because attack speed, bonus attack speed, scales off of your level 1 attack speed, right? So if we get our calculator out right here, we can do some little bit of calculations. So we see that about most champions have about a 0.66 base attack speed at level 1. So all bonus attack speed they will get scale off this 0.66. And so for an example, we could say 40% like Phantom Dancer will give them 0.26 attack speed. But this mastery here, if you put 4 points into it, you only get 4 attack speed. So that results in this much attack speed. So if we could add that to 0.66, you can see that ends up being pretty much nothing. It's 0.02 attack speed for 4 mastery points, which is actually pretty much insignificant. So this mastery, just like last season, is pretty much terrible. Sorcery did get a little bit of a buff. Now it gives 1.25% CDR instead of just 1%, so that's pretty good. And then we have Butcher here, which is the same thing as last time, except now it's just 1 point. And it's a pretty solid mastery as well. Usually I end up taking 4 points into Sorcery on the first tree, or either 2 points and then 1 point into Feast and 1 point into Butcher, depending on if I want this mastery. And then we have this really interesting one, Double-Edged Sword. So what this does is make it so that you deal additional damage, but you also receive additional damage. So on melee, I think this is a really solid one because you're going to deal 2% more damage and then only receive 1% more damage. But on range, it's even of 1.5%. This is kind of an interesting mastery. You can take it if you want. And then because since these trees, we only see 3, you can either choose to put the point into here or the extra point into Sorcery or Feast or Butcher. So we're going to have this one AD per level and of course AP per level. And then here we have this one, Spell Weaving. I think it's pretty interesting. Damaging an enemy champion with an auto attack increases your spell damage by 1%, stacking up to 3 times. So 3% spell damage it's a little bit, so it's not necessarily terrible, and it's only 1 mastery point, so this could be viable in some situations. And then of course we have Flat AD and Flat AP. These 2 masteries, and as well as the level 1s, are ridiculously overpowered, and you should take them pretty much in any situation where you are using those offensive trees. And of course we have Executioner next. So this scales up to increases damage dealt to champions below 50% health by 5% once you get those 3 points into there. And that's pretty significant because there's going to be a lot of times where you're fighting someone that's below 50% health. And 5% increased damage is enough to make it worth 3 mastery points. So I definitely take this pretty much always. And then we have Blade Weaving, which is the opposite of Spell Weaving, which pretty much is just the other way around. Your spells will increase your basic attack damage. So these 2 you kind of just want to take on someone maybe like Ezreal or something like that, where you're doing a lot of spell damage as well as auto attacking too. And then we have, of course, percent attack damage and percent ability power. And then we have this Dangerous Game, which I actually think is kind of a completely useless mastery, and I would never take this. The reason being is because you have to get the kill for it to work. If you get an assist, this mastery does absolutely nothing, and you can't rely on getting the kills. And even that 5% of health and mana, although it can be significant in some situations, isn't really enough for this to be worth the mastery point in my opinion. And so we can take just 3 into one of these 2 here, and then you put your last point to Sorcery, or perhaps Feast if you didn't get it already. And then we have Devastating Strikes, extremely solid. It combined armor and magic penetration. That's really, really solid change. So that kind of thing makes it so this mastery is pretty much mandatory if you make it this far down in the tree. And then, so this is the one that you would take on both. And then, of course, we have the 2 Frenzy for the AD champions, where your critical hits increase your attack speed by a significant percent. And this is the new replacement for Spell Sword, where your basic attacks also deal bonus magic damage. And then at the end we have Havoc, which is really good now considering that it's only 1 point for 3% increased damage overall, which is definitely very significant for a mastery. And so that's the offensive tree, so let's get into the defensive tree. So we have block here. This has been moved down to the start, which is really good because these were actually some of the best defensive masteries at Season 3. So block is definitely something you pick up. Recovery is pretty solid too. 1 health per 5. You get 2 points in that, 2 health per 5. That's pretty solid for just for masteries. And enchanted armor, this has been combined into 2 points instead of 3. And this is definitely a very solid pickup on champions that can scale well with this. For example, Thresh, Leona, where your abilities scale with this bonus armor and magic resistance. Because keep in mind, it is bonus armor and magic resistance, not your regular armor and magic resistance. So this kind of thing does scale with Thresh's passive, Leona's W, things like that. If your champion doesn't have an ability that scales with it, then it's not really that good. Tough Skin, that's just the standard jungler mastery from last year, pretty much the same thing, they just changed the icon. And then we have Unyielding, which is pretty much how it was last year, except now melees get 1 more reduced damage. So that results in a 4 reduced damage from champions, or 3 if you're a ranged champion. So pretty solid, it's pretty significant, and the difference does add up. So now we have Veteran Scars. This has been combined into 3 points instead of just 1, but it will give you 36 health instead of 30. But since it does take 3 points now, it is a little bit weaker, but it's still a pretty solid pickup considering there isn't that much on this tree, and you're not going to be taking both Tough Skin and Block at the same time. So you'll just get Veteran Scars and Unyielding, or you'll get Veteran Scars and Bladed Armor. And Bladed Armor is, of course, how it was last season, where you just deal some damage to minions when they hit you. And then we have Oppression. I think this mastery doesn't seem to be that strong because it reduces damage taken by 3% from enemies that have impaired movement. So it's going to reduce the damage you take from champions that are CC'd. But the thing is that if a champion is CC'd, then you're probably not taking any damage from them anyways. So this mastery does seem to be kind of useless, and I would never take it. And then we have Juggernaut, which has been combined into 1 point instead of 3 for an overall 3% maximum health. Very solid since it's only 1 point, and you're probably getting Veteran Scars anyways. Then we have Hardiness and Resistance. These have been moved down to here, this part of the tree. So you put the 3 points in them to get the 5 armor and 5 MR. And we have Perseverance. This mastery, I think, is extremely solid. 1% of your missing health every 5 seconds. So for 3 points, it will give you 3% of your missing health every 5 seconds. So say you have 1,000 health missing, right? So that 1,000 times 0.03, 3%, that's going to give you 30 HP regen for 5 seconds if you have just 1,000 health missing. And since you're going to the defensive tree, it's likely that you're a champion that's fairly tanky, and that means you'll be likely getting around 3,000 health or so once you get your first or second item, and it's very likely that you'll be in a situation with 1,000 health missing, even if you're just normally in lane. So this is a pretty solid mastery, and I would definitely pick this up if you're on a champion that's going to build health. And then we have Swiftness here, reduce the effectiveness of slows by 10%. It's pretty solid, but 10% isn't that significant. So, I mean, you can take this up if you want to, but it's not mandatory like some of the other masteries. And then we have Reinforced Armor here, reduces damage taken by critical strikes by 10%. Also not really mandatory, but it is pretty solid. 10% isn't necessarily significant, but it still makes a difference, so it can be worth the mastery point if you want to take it. And then we have Evasive here, reduces damage taken by 4% from AoE magic damage. I don't think that's really significant as well, so I pretty much just put the 3 points into Perseverance, then I'll take one of these depending on what the matchup is for this tier in the tree. Then we have Second Wind here, increases sources of all incoming healing by 10% when below 25% health. I don't think this is a very good mastery at all because healing is not something that's exactly reliable, and 10% healing isn't exactly significant as well. With the exception of Soraka, most champions don't heal for significant amounts. What they do instead is heal often. Like Sona has a very short cooldown on her heal, things like that. And I guess you could take this if you have a healer on your team, but there are going to be some situations where you're not having any healers on your team. So this isn't really very useful at all. So we have this Tenacious Mastery. I think this is a pretty interesting change. Once you get the 4 points into it, it's going to give you 4 armor and 2 magic resistance for each nearby enemy champion, which will give you up to 20 armor and 10 magic resistance if you are next to 5 nearby enemy champions, which is actually extremely significant. 20 armor and 10 magic resistance just for masteries, that's a lot. And it is 4 points, but the thing is that the other 2 here kind of aren't that good, so I will usually end up taking the 4 points into Tenacious. And then we have Runic Shield here. Start the game with a 50 health shield. This shield regenerates each time you respawn. Now this is a really interesting mastery that's very new. It seems to me that it's very weak considering that it doesn't scale with your level, right? So you're going to start with that 50 health shield. At the beginning of the game, it'll be alright, right? And you get that 50 health shield at the beginning, but it doesn't regenerate until you die and respawn. And at that point, you're probably having around 1,000 health or so at least. and at that point the 50 health shield is pretty much insignificant. So this is only really useful for the very first time use at level 1. So unless you're going for an extremely cheese play at level 1, this mastery is pretty much useless. And because of that, we take the 4 points into Tenacious most of the time. So we have Legendary Guardian here, reduces the duration of crowd control effects by 15%. So this says crowd control effects, and it's the duration. So this is pretty much 15% tenacity. So this is a really solid mastery, definitely going to be picked up. Of course it's solid, I mean it's at the end of the tree, but it's definitely really strong for defensive champions. And lastly we have the utility tree. So we're going to start with Phase Walker. This is pretty much the replacement for improved recall. Reduces the casting time of recall by 1 second. Not really that significant, but it can save your life in some very specific situations. We have Fleet of Foot. This is a very solid mastery. If you get the 3 points into it, it's going to give you 1.5% movement speed. Movement speed is pretty much the strongest stat in the game, and because of that, it's pretty hard to get on items. So being able to get 1.5% movement speed just from your masteries from the first tree, I think this might be something that you end up taking on pretty much every single champion. Except for some tough situations where you're maybe going 9 into the defense tree or 9 into the offense tree, things like that. But this is a very solid mastery for sure. And then of course the 3 mana regen per 5 for meditation, nothing new there. We have Scout here. This has been changed from the previous mastery. Increases the cast range of wards and relic items by 10%. Now this doesn't seem to be that good since it only does increase the range, but it can help you for face checking. So if you do have an extra point, this can be an optional mastery. And so we have Conjure, and summoned units and traps have 10% increased durations. This isn't really that good considering it only works on wards. It's only really useful on like Nidalee traps and things like that, and those already have a pretty significant duration themselves, so this 10% increased duration kind of does nothing. So I find this to be a pretty useless mastery. Then we have Summoner's Insight, no difference from how it was last season. Strength of Spirit, gain health regeneration equal to 10% of your mana regeneration. For 1 point, I think this is a pretty solid mastery. Considering if you get the Meditation Mastery because it is necessary, if you build 1 mana regen item, this is pretty much worth it, considering that'll bump you up to probably around 20 mana regen or so, which will give you 2 health regen for just 1 mastery point. So this is a pretty solid mastery and pretty cost efficient, assuming that you're going to build 1 mana regen item. And then we have Alchemist, increases the duration of your potions and elixirs by 10%. So that is going to improve health potions and things like that, but 10% isn't very significant. But what we do get this for is for the next one, the Culinary Master. Your health potions are upgraded into biscuits that restore 20 health and 10 mana instantly upon consumption, which makes potions a lot stronger. But we don't usually have the points to afford this, so this is definitely an optional mastery. But Culinary Master is pretty solid, but it's not always necessarily worth those 2 points. And then we have Runic Affinity, and this will give you 1.5 gold per 10 with the 3 points. Just a little bit of a nerf from last season, which is, I think, definitely needed. And then we have, of course, Greed, increase the duration of Shrine Relic quests and neutral monster buffs by 20%, no different from last season. And then Vampirism, 1% life and spell vamp. So this is pretty early in the tree, and if you're not on a support champion, like you're on an 80 carry or an 80 mid, and you're taking utility masteries, this Vampirism can be pretty solid, but definitely if you're playing support, it's not really necessary, of course. And we have Wealth here. One gold each time an ally kills a nearby lane minion. This is a mini Philosopher's Pebble, and it's a very, very solid mastery. So if you're going this far down the tree, definitely get that Runic Affinity and Wealth, assuming that you're a support player. Of course, if you're a mid laner, you're not really going to take Wealth. And you have Bandit, 40 starting gold for just 1 point. That's definitely worth it. Makes your starting items a lot better. And it used to be 2 points last season, so this mastery did get a little bit of a buff, which is pretty good. And we have Expanded Mind, 2% increased maximum mana. This one is the change from last season where it was, a flat increased mana, where it's now percent mana. So if you're building mana items, and let's say on a champion like Anivia where you get that Rod of Ages, or especially Rise, this is a very solid mastery. So this is a champion specific mastery, but it still can be solid in some situations. And then we have Inspiration, 5 experience every 10 seconds while near a higher leveled allied champion. I find this mastery to actually be kind of useless, considering if you're support, that's the only really situation where this is going to be viable, and supports usually stay about the same level of their AD carry anyways, except for once the game hits the midpoint, and at that point the experience from this is pretty much insignificant, so it doesn't matter at all. And then we have Scavenger. Melee grants additional gold on assist or kill, and ranged gives the Pickpocket Mastery. So this is a replacement from Pickpocket, and it's pretty solid. You could usually end up getting a couple hundred gold from this. So I definitely would take this if you're getting Bandit, which is also really solid. So usually you pretty much always get this. And then we have Intelligence, which is going to give you the 6% CDR, and now it's combined with reducing the cooldown of your activated items. So this is also really solid too if you're going to make it down here. So at this level of the tier, you're pretty much just guaranteed to put the 4 points into there. And then lastly, we have Wanderer, 5% movement speed outside of combat. 5% is very significant and very solid. Even though it's only out of combat, it's enough percent of movement speed to make it so that this mastery is definitely really solid, and you're pretty much going to take it anyways, since it is the last point in the tree, and you're always going to want to take that last point if you're going down the middle anyways. So there you have it. That's going to be the Season 4 mastery. So I don't really want to show you guys example of trees since they aren't really set in stone yet. There's still a little bit of confusion on some masteries, but definitely that should give you guys the tools to decide for yourself and what you think are the best masteries for Season 4 and create a page for yourself. So that is it for my Season 4 Masteries guide. My name is Jeremy. As always, thanks for watching. I'd love if you guys could follow my stream at twitch.tv/Jeremy_gamingcurios, and I'd love if you could support me with a like. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.